You threw me into the abyss, but I will rise from it in light.
My name is Marcus Thompson, and this is the story of how my ex-wife plotted against me and my 8-year-old son for insurance money, and how I got my revenge. I didn't want to go on that camping trip. Something in my gut told me it was wrong, the kind of wrong that doesn't announce itself with a bang, but whispers with a smile. My wife, Sarah, stood in our driveway with a red thermos and checklist, barking last-minute instructions like a field commander. Danny, our 8-year-old, scampered around with a flashlight nearly half his size, eyes bright with excitement. To him, this was an adventure. To me, it felt like a trap. I loaded the last cooler into Tyler's SUV, the one with the cracked taillight he never bothered fixing, and shut the hatch harder than necessary. I didn't trust them. I hadn't for months. Sarah and I barely talked unless it was about bills or Danny's school. Her layoff made everything worse. She didn't blame the company. She blamed me, said I had my head buried too deep in Vertex Solutions, my startup, to notice she was drowning. So she suggested this trip to reconnect, putting her hand on my arm like she remembered how. Her reconnection included her college friends Lisa and Emma, plus Tyler, her half-brother who never outgrew his frat boy phase. I wanted to say no, almost did, but then Danny overheard and his face lit up with that magic only kids possess when they still believe the world is good and fair. The drive to Cascade National Forest was long and winding, full of empty conversation. Tyler led in his car while we followed in ours, stocked with supplies for a long weekend in the wild. Danny kept asking if we'd see bears. I told him hopefully not. Sarah stared out the passenger window, like the trees held answers she couldn't find in me anymore. We arrived late afternoon during golden hour, when even broken things look whole. The park sprawled in every direction with thick green wilderness where cell reception died and silence grew. Our cars parked on gravel clearing ringed by towering pines, a shallow river humming nearby. Lisa was already setting up her tent with military precision. Emma wore sunglasses too expensive for the woods, scrolling through her phone even though we all knew the signal was dead. Tyler cracked a beer, passed another to Sarah, and winked at me in a way that didn't feel friendly. "Welcome to paradise, man," he said, raising his can. I forced a smile. That first night, we sat around a fire Tyler built with logs he claimed to chop himself, though I saw the plastic-wrapped bundles in his truck bed. Sarah sat too close to him. Emma played terrible pop music from a Bluetooth speaker. I watched flames dance while beer went warm in my hand. Danny leaned against my side, yawning. "Dad, this is the best," he murmured. I kissed his forehead and said I was glad he was having fun. He deserved this happiness. I didn't. Later that night, after Danny fell asleep in our tent, I stood outside under a sky too clear to lie beneath. I watched shapes moving near the fire, Tyler whispering something in Sarah's ear, her laughing and swatting his arm, Lisa watching Emma slip into trees for a phone call that wouldn't connect. It felt wrong, like a play I hadn't been cast in but somehow had to watch. I went to bed with a headache and knots in my chest. The next morning, over instant coffee and oatmeal packets, Sarah said we should all do our own thing for a bit. "Take Danny on one of your little walks," she said, using that tone reserved for hobbies she didn't respect. "There's a short trail by the stream. Won't take more than an hour." I didn't argue. What was the point? Danny was already lacing his boots. I grabbed my small pack, tucked in a map and canteen, and we headed out. The trees swallowed us quickly, and for a while I forgot the tension, forgot the dull throb in my skull. Danny quizzed me about animal tracks and asked if he could build a fort when we got back. I told him we'd see. 45 minutes later, we returned to find everything gone. The tents, cars, gear, people, all vanished except for a single note on the picnic table, held down by a stone. I didn't pick it up right away. I just stood there, mouth dry, while Danny looked around confused. "Where'd everybody go?" I finally stepped forward. The handwriting was familiar. Tyler's sloppy, smug scrawl. "This is for the best. Trust me." My legs went numb, my ears filled with static. Danny tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, where's Mom?" I looked down at him and smiled because that's what I was supposed to do, what he needed me to do. "Maybe they went looking for us," I said. He nodded, trusting me, believing me. But I knew in that moment what I couldn't say out loud. They'd left us on purpose. I walked the perimeter twice, hoping they'd left something behind. A clue, a bag, water, nothing. They hadn't just abandoned us. They'd erased us. Methodically, deliberately. I dropped to my knees where our tent had been and clawed at dirt. Nothing. Like we'd never existed there. Like this was always meant to be a one-way trip. As night fell, cold came sharp. I wrapped Danny in the thin emergency blanket from my hiking pack, and we curled under the wooden shelter near the table, where the roof sagged just enough to block dew. I held him close, rubbing his back while he drifted to sleep. My eyes stared into darkness. What kind of people leave a child behind? It wasn't just Sarah. It was all of them. Tyler, Lisa, Emma. People we'd laughed with, trusted, made memories with. How long had they planned this? Did they discuss it over wine? Whisper about it in group chats I didn't know existed? At dawn, I splashed freezing creek water over my face and stared at my reflection, eyes sunken, jaw tight. Danny stirred when I returned. Are they back yet? Not yet, I said, helping him to his feet. We had to move. Hope was a trap. What we needed was distance, options, and a plan. I gathered what little we had. The knife, map, empty canteen, small flashlight, and packed everything into my hiking bag. I tore the note in quarters and buried it under dirt. Danny looked up worried. Where are we going? I tightened the bag straps. We're going to find help, I said steadily, and we're going to be okay. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Sarah and the others thought they were doing, they'd underestimated one truth. You don't abandon a man like me and expect him to disappear quietly. We followed the creek, figuring water always leads somewhere. A ranger post, road, town. I kept Danny within arm's reach. Every branch crack made my hand move instinctively to the knife. We walked for hours. The trail disappeared fast. Deer tracks faded. Trees crowded tighter. I cut through brambles with the knife, parting thick vines as we climbed moss-slick inclines. This is like that survival show you love, huh? I kept my voice light for Danny. He nodded, then whispered, but the guy on the show has a camera crew. I laughed. A real one, first in days. Well, you've got me. I'm your crew. By midday, the bottle was empty. I didn't want to push him too hard, so we stopped where the stream widened into a pool. I made him rest while I filtered water through cloth, let it settle, and prayed it was clean enough. He sipped slowly. We should catch fish, he said hopefully, like in the show. One step at a time. I spotted wild berries in a sunny patch. I tested them first, not nightshade. Then we picked until our hands were stained red. They tasted like tart sugar. Danny smiled again. That night, we stopped by flat rocks surrounding dry moss. I gathered bark, dead branches, soft pine needles. I scraped the knife against rock for what felt like hours until sparks caught. When fire finally flickered to life, Danny clapped. I let him believe it was magic. See? We're going to be fine, I said. We shared the last granola bar. I gave him the bigger half. He handed me a bite anyway. Dad, do you think Mom got lost too? I stared at flames too long before answering. I think Mom made a mistake, but right now we're going to be okay because we have each other. He nodded. He understood more than I wanted him to. He curled up beside me, wrapped in the emergency blanket again. Stars above looked fake, like someone punched pinholes in black fabric. I stayed awake long after his breathing steadied. Every sound felt threatening. Every rustle could be a bear or worse. But what really gnawed at me wasn't outside the firelight. It was the question of why. Why would she leave? This wasn't spur-of-the-moment betrayal. Every tent folded, every car started, every trace removed. This was orchestrated. And Tyler's note, trust me. Those words boiled under my skin. The next morning, Danny woke shivering. I gave him remaining berries and filtered water. We moved slowly, his feet sore but uncomplaining. I made him a walking stick from a branch, showed him how to balance. You're a real outdoorsman now, I said. He grinned, proud. We kept near the stream, following its meandering path through dense forest. Around noon, we found wild onions. I dug some out with the knife, rinsed them in water, chewed slowly. Sharp, bitter, but it filled the hollow. Danny spit his out. Tastes like feet. That means it's working, I laughed. We made camp near a rock wall that night. Wind was louder there, whistling warnings. I built another fire, smaller this time. I noticed Danny wasn't eating much. You tired? I asked. He nodded, then lay down early. His eyes closed fast, but I could see heat rising from his forehead. I pressed my palm to it. Too hot. I dug through the pack and pulled out dandelion root I'd gathered earlier. I crushed it, poured water over it, boiled it in a dented tin cup. The tea was bitter and dark. I raised his head and helped him sip. You're going to feel better soon, Danny. I promise. He murmured something in his sleep. Mom. I turned away, blinked back rage. By the third day, I began understanding just how cruel wilderness could be. It didn't hate you or love you, it simply didn't care if you lived or died. That quiet indifference pressed down as I carried Danny through a ravine, his weight lighter than it should have been, breathing shallow against my neck. He'd stopped talking sometime the night before, voice barely a whisper. His skin burned with fever. We'd been surviving on berries, wild onions, and boiled stream water. I'd even caught a frog once, roasting it on a stick for protein, but it wasn't enough. Danny was small for his age, and this was taking its toll. I reached flat ground and laid him gently in fern beds. His face was flushed, sweat beading along his hairline despite cool mountain air. He shivered, curling up like he was trying to disappear. I sat beside him, hands trembling, rummaging through our pack. Nothing helpful. No medicine, antiseptic, gauze. Only what nature could offer, and that terrified me. I remembered an old survival guide. Dandelion root could reduce fever. I chewed some, swallowing bitterness, then crushed the rest into the cup with water and set it over fire coaxed from damp bark and dry grass. Danny stirred, calling out barely audibly, "Mom!" The word was like a knife. I wanted to rage, to scream her name into trees, ask how she could do this, how she could abandon her own child. But I couldn't afford that luxury. He needed calm, strength. He needed me. I helped him sip tea when it cooled, holding the cup steady as his hands trembled. He coughed once, closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, and for a moment, I thought he was slipping away. I grabbed his hand, too hot. "You're okay, Danny," I whispered, trying to believe it myself. "You're strong." I sat beside him all night, didn't doze, didn't blink for long, just watched him breathe. Every chest movement lifted a tiny weight. Every pause sent terror clenching my heart. I prayed. Not memorized church prayers, but raw, ugly, wordless bargaining with whatever force might listen. I hadn't spoken to God in years, but that night I begged. I promised if Danny made it, I'd become the man he deserved. And I swore I'd make the people who did this pay. By morning, the fever hadn't broken, but hadn't worsened. Danny opened glassy eyes mid-morning and focused. "Water," he croaked. I gave him what I had. He drank slowly. "Are we still exploring?" he asked. It almost broke me. "Yeah, buddy, still exploring. Just taking a little rest." That day moved slowly. Fire kept dying, wind picked up. I stayed close to Danny, gathering more berries, rationing water. By late afternoon, his fever finally began dropping. He was sweating less, skin cooler. I didn't cheer, just exhaled. I leaned against a tree, bark rough on my back, and for the first time in days, allowed myself to cry. Not loud, not long, just enough to let weight shift off my chest. Silent tears for a man who'd lost everything but the one thing that made him human. Sometime before dawn, I felt something inside me change. Not rage. I'd had that already. Not grief. It came in waves, too. This was colder, heavier, like steel. I would get us out, and when I did, I wasn't simply going to call police or scream for justice. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. Day 6 began with silence of decision. Danny was finally better, fever passed, but still weak, hollow cheeks sunken with exhaustion. I gave him water and saved spruce tips, and for the first time in days, he looked at me without illness glazing his gaze. "Where are we going today, Dad?" His voice was raspy, but stronger. "Somewhere better," I said, meaning it. The ridge we'd camped near sloped upward into hills. I'd spent days studying terrain with the frayed trail map buried under my pack seat. Almost useless, but I could make out basic features: streams, elevations, symbols for cabins and ranger stations. We weren't where we'd started anymore. But if I read terrain right, smoke I'd seen the evening before was a fire tower or old ranger lookout. If active, it meant rescue. If not, still shelter. Either way, hope. Danny tried standing alone, but winced. His right leg had bothered him since day 2. Never complained, not once, but I saw how he shifted weight, the grimace he thought I didn't notice. I took off my belt, looped it through our pack straps, fashioning a makeshift sling around his shoulders and waist so I could carry some of his weight. We climbed slowly, steep incline littered with fallen branches and loose rock. My boot slipped more than once, but I caught myself. I had to. Couldn't fall with him depending on me. He stayed silent for most of the climb, saving breath. Every so often, "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." We reached a small ledge by midday and paused. I gave him water, let him rest in shade while I climbed higher to scan the horizon. There it was, smoke. Thin gray column rising over the northern ridge. Controlled, steady. Not wildfire, but purposeful. A signal, camp, maybe a tower. My knees weakened, but not from fear. We were close. I slid back to Danny and smiled. See that smoke up there? He nodded slowly. We're going there. He leaned against me and I felt relief in his small frame. The climb was brutal. Legs screamed, lungs burned, hands torn from grasping branches, scraping bark, lifting Danny when terrain got too steep. I never let go, not once. At one point, the sling came undone and I slipped, landing hard on my side. Ribs protested. I bit my cheek and forced myself up. Danny was crying quietly. I'm okay, I said, brushing myself off, breathing through pain. You're hurt, he pointed to my elbow. Just a scratch. We've come too far to stop now. The final stretch was worst. Narrow path over jagged rock. One wrong step and we'd tumble into the ravine below. I told Danny to hold my shoulders tight, took each step slow until we crested the hill. And there it was, silver glint in trees. Metal, a fire lookout with aluminum siding and faded red roof. Smoke curled from a chimney pipe. Life, or at least chance of it. I almost collapsed from the sight. That's it. That's where we're going. We descended slowly. Forest grew quieter, like it was watching. I knocked on the door with trembling hands. No answer. I circled the base, found a hatch leading to stairs. I hoisted Danny onto my back and climbed. At the top, the door creaked open. Empty, but not abandoned. Inside, a cot, shelf with canned beans and soup, first aid kit, flare tool. I nearly dropped to my knees. Salvation. I laid Danny on the cot. He looked up with tired eyes. We made it, he whispered. I gave him food and water, then tended his foot with iodine and gauze. He winced, but didn't cry. That night, I used the flare tool. I stood on the platform, pointed skyward, and fired. The flare hissed upward, blooming red against darkening sky. I watched it fade and waited. 30 minutes later, rotor blades slicing silence. A helicopter emerged from behind the ridge, dipping low over treetops. Spotlight cut through branches, scanning. I waved both arms, shouted until my throat went raw. They saw us. The bird hovered, descended slowly, kicking up dust and pine needles. A medic jumped out, ran to the tower, pulled Danny into their arms. I followed, limping, dizzy. I don't remember being lifted into the chopper, just Danny reaching for me, his small hand finding mine. Then black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room with an IV in my arm, heart monitor beeping. Danny slept beside me, clean, warm, safe. I didn't know how many days had passed. A nurse came in, called the doctor, but it wasn't the doctor who arrived first. It was a man in a dark suit, holding a badge. FBI, Mr. Thompson, he said. Do you know your wife filed for your death last week? I stared at him, words not making sense. She what? He nodded slowly. We need to talk. That was when I knew they hadn't just abandoned us. They'd tried to erase us. Agent Rodriguez sat at the edge of my hospital bed as I tried processing what he'd told me. Sarah had filed for my death, and Danny's, not missing, not endangered, dead. We received the insurance claim last Wednesday, he continued. Your wife submitted it through an attorney, claimed you went missing on a hike due to stress and mental instability, said you took your son after a series of emotional outbursts. He opened a thick folder, dropped copies on my tray table. There were letters attached, signed notes supposedly from you, a will, even a psychiatric report from a Dr. Martinez. I stared at pages without reading. I didn't need to. I knew they were fake. But there in shaky cursive that almost looked like mine were words I'd never written. They thought we wouldn't find you, Rodriguez said. They thought you wouldn't survive. My eyes shifted to Danny, still asleep. Peaceful face wrapped in hospital blankets. The thought of him listed as deceased in some database made my whole body run cold. How much? I asked. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. The insurance, I clarified. How much were we worth to her? $3.2 million, he said, plus another $800,000 in a policy through Vertex Solutions tied to your ownership. I closed my eyes. And the others? Tyler, Lisa, Emma, all named in the investigation, all corroborated the story. He flipped to a page with Tyler's signature. Your brother-in-law claimed he saw you leave camp alone with Danny, said you were distraught. Sarah backed it up with conveniently saved text messages. Lisa and Emma said they stayed behind because they were uncomfortable. He paused. They even hired a notary to certify the new will. I laughed, bitter, broken. Let me guess. Sarah was sole heir. Rodriguez didn't smile. Correct. I leaned back against pillows, pulse thudding in my ears. We're compiling everything now, he continued. But the fact that you and your son are alive complicates their plan. You were supposed to disappear. It's harder to press a claim when the body walks back into the world. I looked at my hands, still scraped and dirt-stained. They left a child behind, I said. They walked away from him. That's not just fraud, Rodriguez nodded. It's attempted child endangerment, possibly more. Now that the boy's recovered enough to speak, we'll get a statement, but I need your help. Anything, I said. We need your full testimony, everything from the trip, every detail you remember. We'll pair it with GPS data from the helicopter and medical evaluations. If we build the timeline tight enough, we can dismantle their entire story. I nodded. Rodriguez met my eyes. She hasn't been arrested yet. We didn't have enough until now. Something in me shifted. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. 3 days later, I was discharged. Danny, too. He clung to my side as we stepped into sunlight. I was 20 pounds lighter, limping, bruised everywhere, but upright. We were taken to a safe house while investigation continued. Rodriguez visited daily, walking me through documents, transcripts, surveillance footage, timelines. We stitched together every lie they'd built. Hardware store receipts showing Sarah and Tyler buying replacement gear days after we were supposedly lost. ATM footage of Emma withdrawing cash to pay the notary. Paper trails, digital signatures on insurance claims time-stamped just 2 days after we'd vanished. And the bombshell. Danny's voice, calm but clear, telling the child psychologist that he and Daddy went on a short walk and came back to an empty campsite. When Rodriguez heard the recording, he said, "That's it. That's what we needed." I asked one question. When do we bring them in? He looked at his watch. We already are. That afternoon, they executed warrants. Tyler was picked up at a downtown gym. Lisa was cornered in her classroom. She taught 3rd grade. God help those kids. Emma was pulled off a red-eye flight to Vegas. And Sarah, she was at brunch wearing my mother's earrings, laughing. Rodriguez showed me footage later. She didn't flinch when they read charges, just calmly placed her mimosa on the table and asked if she needed to finish paying the bill. You're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted child endangerment, and falsifying legal documents, the agent said. I understand, she replied, like they were discussing a parking ticket. When she saw cameras outside, though, her face changed. That was the moment it hit her. I was alive and coming for everything. I stood outside the courtroom in a navy suit that barely fit anymore, fabric looser than it should have been. Danny was with my sister inside, reading a comic book on one of the benches. He didn't need to hear this. He'd lived through enough. Inside, Sarah sat surrounded by the people she'd once called friends. Tyler with arms crossed like he owned the room. Lisa in her charcoal blazer and dark sunglasses like this was a fashion show. Emma chewing gum, disinterested as ever. And Sarah sitting front and center like this was a job interview instead of a reckoning. None of them looked at me when I walked in. My lawyer, Patricia Manning, dropped a thick folder in front of the judge with a sound that made the room flinch. Your Honor, she began, what you're about to review isn't simply evidence of a forged will or fraudulent insurance claim. It's evidence of a coordinated attempt to profit from the staged disappearance and presumed death of my client and his 8-year-old son. The judge nodded. Proceed. Patricia opened the folder. First came surveillance photos. Sarah and Tyler at the hardware store buying rope, tarps, water jugs 2 days after Danny and I had gone missing. Then receipts, gas station logs, credit card swipes, timestamps that didn't align with their statements. After that, audio. A voicemail Sarah left on Lisa's phone a day before the camping trip. Make sure the gear is packed in Tyler's car. Marcus is going to take the bait. Danny, too. The courtroom went silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. The judge leaned forward. Play that again. Patricia did, and this time it landed harder. Then came forged psychiatric letters supposedly written by Dr. Martinez, claiming I'd shown signs of breakdown, paranoia, instability. The judge narrowed his eyes. We've subpoenaed Dr. Martinez. He confirmed he's never met my client. His signature was copied from an unrelated document, and the license number listed is for a pediatrician in another state. Sarah shifted in her seat. Tyler stopped tapping his foot. Patricia handed over the signed will, claiming I'd revised my estate 6 days before the trip, leaving everything to Sarah. "And the notary?" the judge asked. "She's here, Your Honor," Patricia said. A woman in her 50s took the stand, voice shaking at first but steadying quickly. I was paid under the table to stamp the document. I never witnessed a signature, never met Marcus Thompson. I was told it was a rush job for a man leaving the country. She started crying. I didn't know there was a child involved. The judge removed his glasses. "Thank you, Miss Carey." Tyler muttered something under his breath. Emma stared at the ceiling. Lisa finally removed her sunglasses. Sarah stared straight ahead. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand slowly, every step reminding me of the ache in ribs that never quite healed. I sat down and looked around the courtroom. "My name is Marcus Thompson," I began. "And what happened to me and my son wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding or miscommunication. It was a plan, a deliberate plan to remove me from my own life." I told the court everything. The trip, hike, note, food rationing, fever, fire tower, flare. But when I got to Danny asking for his mother, I had to stop. I looked at Sarah. "Then he asked for you," I said softly. "While he burned with fever, while he lay in dirt thinking you were coming back. And you weren't." Patricia touched my shoulder. I nodded and turned back to the judge. "We survived because we had to. But I want it on record. The people sitting over there didn't just try to steal my company. They tried to erase me, and they were willing to let a child die to do it." The silence afterward was thick. The judge called a recess. During the break, Sarah finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, not regretful, not ashamed, just calculating. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. "Mr. Thompson, any comment?" I paused, then said, "They tried to replace me. Now let's make sure they don't get away with it." Back inside, the judge announced his ruling. "The evidence establishes clear grounds for criminal trial. This court finds sufficient cause to move forward with formal charges: insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted endangerment of a minor, and falsification of legal documents." He looked directly at the defendants. "You are remanded into custody until trial date is set." Tyler stood to protest, but was cut off by bailiffs. Emma looked stunned. Lisa began crying. "And Sarah?" She finally blinked. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victim, but as a man who'd pulled his son from the jaws of betrayal and brought truth into light. We weren't just left behind. We were supposed to be gone, but we came back stronger. The trial began on a gray Monday morning. I adjusted Danny's tie in the back row and gave him a reassuring nod. He wasn't testifying, but he wanted to be there. He said he needed to see it through. So did I. Sarah entered first, flanked by her attorney. No makeup, hair in a low bun, wearing a beige blazer 2 sizes too big. It was an act, and I saw right through it. Patricia began opening statements. This is not simply about fraud. This is about betrayal of the deepest kind. 4 adults, including a mother, who left a child and his father in the wilderness to die, not because of desperation, but for money. The prosecutor called me as first witness. I retold the story, this time to jurors. A woman in a green blouse wiped tears when I described carrying Danny up the ridge. Another nodded when I talked about boiling stream water. Then came evidence. Email threads between Lisa and Emma. "Emma, is it done yet?" "Lisa, he won't last 10 days out there. Not with a kid." Laughter emojis, then texts from Tyler to Sarah. "Tyler, we'll file Monday. The sooner the better." "Sarah? Use the second draft of the psych letter, the one with family history." That text hit the jury like a slap. When the notary took the stand again, detailing how Lisa arranged the meeting and paid her $2,000 in cash, saying it was urgent because Marcus was leaving the country and didn't trust banks. Sarah's attorney tried painting her as a manipulated woman, caught up in something orchestrated by her reckless brother and pressured friends. But then, the prosecutor pulled out the real evidence. Security footage from 3 days before the trip. Sarah alone at a bank, speaking to a financial advisor about liquidating the trust left by my late grandfather. "He won't need it," she'd said on camera. "He's going through something." The jury didn't buy her performance after that. Tyler's attorney attempted damage control, claiming his client believed I was in a fragile state and had panicked. The jury was then shown a clip from Tyler's podcast where he joked about camping and letting nature take care of things. "Don't leave your brother-in-law in the woods unless you're ready to cash out," he'd said. The room froze. Lisa and Emma didn't even try defending themselves. Their lawyers went for plea bargains mid-trial, too late. Damage was done. For closing arguments, Patricia stood tall. They didn't just try to steal money. They tried to erase a man, and worse, they tried to erase a child's future. They gambled that no one would come looking, that Wilderness would do the work for them. But Wilderness didn't. Marcus Thompson came back. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Verdicts: Sarah, guilty on all counts. Tyler, guilty. Lisa, guilty. Emma, guilty. I held Danny's hand as the judge delivered sentencing. This court has never seen such blatant, calculated misuse of trust. For attempted endangerment of a minor insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsification of federal documents. Sarah Thompson, 25 years, eligible for parole after 18. Tyler Morrison, 20 years. Lisa Chen and Emma Rodriguez, 15 years each. As they were led away handcuffed and silent, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Outside, reporters swarmed. A microphone was thrust in my face. "Mr. Thompson, how do you feel? What do you want the public to know?" I looked down at Danny. 10 days in the woods taught me who my real family is, I said. And it's not defined by lineage. It's defined by who shows up, who stays, who fights. I didn't answer more questions. I just took Danny's hand and walked away. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors, and no one would ever erase us again. 10 days in the wilderness taught us everything we needed to know about survival. 10 days of pain earned us 10 years of justice for Sarah, 20 for Tyler, 15 each for Lisa and Emma. The headlines rolled in fast, but I didn't read them. I was living the story every day. The house we moved into wasn't large, but it was ours. 2 bedrooms near the coast, small front porch, yard where Danny could be a child again. I painted his room sky blue, let him pick dinosaur bedding. Danny got a dog, a shaggy brown rescue named Scout who followed him everywhere. Vertex Solutions was still mine. Sarah's forged ownership documents were thrown out before preliminary motions. I resumed operations quietly with a skeleton crew who'd always believed in the product. Every line of code felt like rebuilding bones that had been shattered. Danny was doing better, smiling more, laughing more, sleeping without asking if someone was coming to take him. But sometimes I caught him staring off, holding the old compass from our hike. He still carried it like a talisman. One evening on the back porch after dinner, Danny looked up with that serious expression kids get when they're processing big thoughts. "Why did they do it, Dad?" I set my plate down. "Because they thought we were in the way," I said quietly. "Because they believed their lives would be easier without us." He nodded like he'd already guessed. "But we weren't in the way." I looked at him, firm jaw, fierce glint in his eye, and saw the man he might become, someone who knew how to stand when everyone else expected him to fall. "No," I said, "we weren't." People asked if I was going to change my name, disappear, and rebuild somewhere else. But I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to live openly, fully on my terms. The justice system had done its part. Healing was on us, and we were doing it. One breakfast, one walk with Scout, one line of code, one smile at a time. I looked down at the picture my son had drawn, the 2 of us standing side by side beneath a bright sky, our little dog racing at our feet, and a house behind us with sunlight pouring through its windows. At first, it seemed like a child's simple sketch, but to me it was proof that we had made it through. That drawing told our whole story without a single word. We had been betrayed, left to freeze and starve, and stripped of everything we thought we could trust. But we had survived. More than that, we had built something new, something stronger. I realized then that survival itself wasn't the victory. The real triumph was showing my boy that even when those closest to you turn their backs, you can still rise, fight for your life, and create a future no one can take away. I set the drawing down and felt a quiet strength settle in me. The wilderness had tried to erase us, but instead it carved us into something unbreakable. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty, no one would ever abandon us again.